Fourth stage. True understanding or reason. Now we reach the highest stage. This is called true understanding or reason. This is the highest form of knowledge. Here, the mind directly understands the world of forms. Notice the example on the slide. The pure forms, especially the form of the good. For Plato, the form of the good is the highest reality. It is the source of truth, justice, beauty, and wisdom. Just as the sun gives light that allows us to see physical objects, the form of the good gives the light of understanding that allows us to know truth. Imagine entering a dark room. You cannot see anything. The moment someone switches on the light, everything becomes clear. Similarly, the form of the good illuminates the mind. It helps us understand all other forms. This is why Plato places it at the highest point of the divided line. The journey of the human mind. Now let us look at the whole diagram. The divided line is not simply about knowledge. It represents the development of the human mind. A person begins with imagination, then moves to belief, then develops logical thinking, finally reaches philosophical wisdom. Education, according to Plato, is this journey upward. It is not memorizing facts. It is gradually training the mind to leave appearances behind and seek eternal truth. This is why Plato believed that rulers should study mathematics, philosophy, and dialectic before governing society. Only those who reach the highest level of understanding can make wise decisions. Conclusion. The divided line explains that human knowledge develops in 4 stages. The first stage is conjecture, where people believe shadows and appearances. The second stage is belief, where people understand physical objects through their senses. The third stage is thought, where the mind uses mathematics and logical reasoning. The fourth and highest stage is true understanding, where reason grasps the eternal forms, especially the form of the good. Plato's message is that education should lift us from ignorance to wisdom, from appearance to reality, and from opinion to true knowledge. The divided line is one of the clearest summaries of Plato's philosophy because it connects ontology, what is real, with epistemology, how we know it, showing that as reality becomes higher, our knowledge also becomes deeper and more certain. Now we come to one of the most famous stories in the history of philosophy. It is called the allegory of the cave. The word allegory means a story in which every character, object, and event has a deeper symbolic meaning. Plato uses this story to explain everything we have studied so far. If the divided line explains the journey of knowledge using a diagram, then the allegory of the cave explains the same journey using a story. Everything in this story is symbolic. The cave represents the physical world. The prisoners represent ordinary human beings. The journey outside the cave represents education. The sun represents the form of the good. Let us understand this story step by step. Part 1. The bound prisoners. Look at the bottom of the slide. We begin with the bound prisoners. Imagine a group of people who have been chained inside a dark cave since childhood. Their hands are tied. Their legs are tied. Even their necks are chained. They cannot turn around. They can only look straight ahead at the wall in front of them. Behind them burns a fire. Between the fire and the prisoners, people carry different objects such as statues, animals, and everyday items. The fire casts the shadows of these objects onto the cave wall. Since the prisoners have never seen the real objects, they believe the shadows are reality itself. For them, the shadow of a horse is the real horse. The shadow of a tree is the real tree. They have never seen the actual objects. Think of a small child who has never left one room. If that child only watches television all day, he may begin to believe that the television world is the whole world. Similarly, the prisoners mistake appearances for reality. This represents the first stage of the divided line, conjecture or imagination. People accept appearances without questioning them. Plato says many human beings live exactly like these prisoners. They believe rumors without checking facts. They accept traditions without asking questions. They confuse appearance with truth. Part 2. The ascent. Anabasis. Now imagine that one prisoner is suddenly freed. At first, he cannot even stand properly because he has been chained for so many years. When someone turns him toward the fire, the light hurts his eyes. He does not want to look. He prefers the familiar shadows. Then he is forced to walk upward and leave the cave. This journey is painful. The bright sunlight hurts his eyes even more. Initially, he cannot see anything clearly. Slowly, his eyes adjust. First, he sees shadows outside. Then reflections in water. Next, he sees trees, mountains, animals, and people. Finally, he looks directly at the sun. This upward journey is called anabasis, which means ascent or climbing upward. What does this symbolize? It represents the difficult process of education. Learning is not always comfortable. Sometimes we must give up old beliefs. Sometimes we discover that ideas we believed for years are actually wrong. That process can be painful. Imagine a student who always believed that the earth is flat. When science proves otherwise, the student must change his entire way of thinking. Changing deeply held beliefs is never easy. Plato says education is exactly like leaving the cave. It requires effort, courage, and patience. Part 3. The sun. Now look at the top of the slide. The prisoner finally sees the sun. According to Plato, the sun represents the form of the good. Remember the previous slide. The form of the good is the highest form. Just as the physical sun gives light that allows us to see objects, the form of the good gives the light of truth that allows the mind to understand reality. Without sunlight, our eyes cannot see. Similarly, without the form of the good, our minds cannot understand truth, justice, beauty, or wisdom. This is why Plato places the sun at the highest point. It symbolizes complete knowledge and philosophical wisdom. At this stage, the prisoner realizes that everything he believed inside the cave was only a shadow of reality. This corresponds to the highest stage of the divided line, true understanding or reason. Part 4. The return, catabasis. Now comes the most important part of the story. Many people think the story ends when the prisoner reaches the sunlight. But Plato says the philosopher has one more duty. He must return to the cave. This return is called catabasis, meaning descent. Why should he return? Because he has a responsibility to help others discover the truth. A true philosopher does not keep wisdom only for himself. He shares it with society. However, returning is not easy. When the philosopher goes back into the dark cave, his eyes cannot immediately adjust to the darkness. The prisoners laugh at him. They think he has become blind. When he tells them that the shadows are not real, they become angry. Some refuse to believe him. Others mock him. Some even become violent. This part of the story reminds us of Socrates. Socrates tried to awaken people through questioning. Instead of appreciating him, the people of Athens condemned him to death. Plato uses this story to show that society often resists uncomfortable truths. People become attached to familiar beliefs, even when those beliefs are false. The meaning of the entire allegory. Now let us understand the whole story together. The cave represents the physical world of appearances. The chains represent ignorance, prejudice, and false beliefs. The shadows represent incomplete knowledge and illusion. The ascent represents education and philosophical inquiry. The sun represents the form of the good and ultimate truth. The return represents the philosopher's duty to educate society, even if people reject him. Conclusion. The allegory of the cave is much more than a story. It is Plato's explanation of the entire purpose of philosophy and education. He teaches that most people begin life trapped by ignorance, accepting appearances as reality. Through education, questioning, mathematics, dialectic, and philosophy, the human mind gradually rises from darkness into the light of truth. But the journey does not end with personal enlightenment. The truly educated person must return to society and help others move from ignorance to knowledge. This allegory beautifully summarizes Plato's philosophy. It brings together his theory of forms, the divided line, the form of the good, and his belief that education is the liberation of the human soul. It also explains why Plato believed that philosophers should become rulers, not because they desire power, but because they possess the wisdom to guide society toward truth, justice, and the common good. So far, we have studied Plato's ideas about knowledge, reality, and education. Now we move to Plato's most famous political work, The Republic. This book is not simply about politics or government. At its heart, it asks one fundamental question: what is justice? Notice the title on the right side of the slide. It says the core question: what is justice? Everything that follows in The Republic is Plato's attempt to answer this single question. But before answering it, Plato first explains how we should search for justice. That is what this slide is about. Why is justice difficult to understand? Let us begin with a simple question. Suppose someone asks you, what makes a person healthy? Can you answer by looking at just one cell of the body? Of course not. You need to understand the entire body first. Only then can you understand the function of each individual part. Plato says justice is exactly like that. If we study only one individual person, justice is difficult to recognize because it is too small and too complex. So instead of beginning with one person, Plato chooses to study something much larger. He decides to study an entire city. The method of magnification. Now look at the first box on the right side. It is called the method of magnification. The word magnification means making something larger so it becomes easier to observe. Think about using a microscope. Tiny bacteria cannot be seen with our naked eyes. But once we magnify them under a microscope, they become clear. Similarly, Plato says justice inside one individual is too small to observe clearly. So he enlarges the problem. Instead of examining one person, he imagines an entire city. He believes that justice will be easier to identify there. Once we understand justice in the city, we can apply the same principle to an individual human being. In simple words, Plato first studies the big picture, and then applies it to the small picture. Why a city? You may wonder, why does Plato choose a city? Because a city is simply a larger version of a human being. A person has different parts working together. Similarly, a city has different groups of people working together. When every part performs its proper function, the entire system works smoothly. Imagine a school. There is a principal, teachers, office staff, students, security guards, cleaning staff. Each has a different responsibility. If everyone performs their own duty sincerely, the school functions peacefully. But if students begin acting like principals, or teachers refuse to teach, or the office staff stop working, confusion begins. Plato says justice works in exactly the same way. Justice exists when every part performs its proper role without interfering with others. Building the ideal city. Now look at the second box. It is called the blueprint of utopia. The word blueprint means a detailed plan before constructing something. For example, before engineers build a bridge, they first prepare a blueprint. Similarly, before discussing justice, Plato first designs an ideal city. He calls this city Kallipolis. The Greek word Kallipolis means the beautiful city or the ideal city. This city does not represent Athens exactly. Instead, it represents the kind of society Plato believes should exist if justice is perfectly established. This is why many scholars describe the Republic as both a political philosophy and an ideal model of society. Why did Plato imagine an ideal state? Remember what we studied earlier. Plato witnessed the Peloponnesian War, the rule of the 30 tyrants, and the execution of Socrates. These events convinced him that existing political systems often fail because they are guided by ignorance, selfishness, and public opinion rather than wisdom. Instead of simply criticizing Athens, Plato asks a new question. If we could build a city from the very beginning, how should it be organized so that justice naturally exists? This becomes the purpose of Kallipolis. It is not merely an imaginary city. It is a philosophical model designed to help us understand justice more clearly. The connection between the city and the soul. Now comes Plato's most brilliant insight. According to Plato, the structure of a just city and the structure of a just person are exactly the same. A city has different groups of citizens. A human being has different parts of the soul. If every group in the city performs its own duty, the city becomes just. Similarly, if every part of the human soul performs its proper function, the individual becomes just. In other words, justice is harmony. It is not simply obeying laws or punishing criminals. Justice means that every part performs its natural function while remaining in proper balance with the others. In the next slides, Plato will explain these different classes of society and the different parts of the human soul in greater detail. The main idea of this slide introduces the basic method that Plato follows throughout the Republic. Instead of directly asking, "What is a just person?" he first asks, "What would a perfectly just society look like?" Once that question is answered, he applies the same principles back to individual human beings. This method allows Plato to explain justice in a clear, systematic, and logical way. Conclusion. This slide lays the foundation for Plato's political philosophy. The central question of the Republic is, what is justice? To answer it, Plato introduces the method of magnification, arguing that justice is easier to understand in a large society than in a single individual. He therefore constructs Callipolis, the ideal city, as a philosophical model where every person performs the role best suited to their nature. After discovering justice in the city, Plato applies the same pattern to the human soul. Thus, the Republic is not merely a book about government, it is an exploration of how harmony, order, wisdom, and justice should exist both in society and within every human being. In the previous slide, we learned that Plato wanted to discover the true meaning of justice by first studying an ideal city. Now, in this slide, Plato finally gives us his answer. Notice the title, The Anatomy of Justice. The word anatomy means studying how something is structured or how its different parts work together. For example, when doctors study the anatomy of the human body, they examine the heart, lungs, brain, and other organs to understand how the body functions. Similarly, Plato studies the structure of the human soul and the structure of the ideal state. His main idea is very simple. A just society and a just person have the same structure. Whatever exists inside the individual soul also exists inside the state. Let us understand each part one by one. First part. Reason. The guardians. Wisdom. Look at the first row. The first part of the soul is called reason. Reason is the thinking part of our mind. It helps us decide what is right and what is wrong. It asks questions. It examines evidence. It controls emotions and desires. For example, suppose you are preparing for an examination. Your friends invite you to watch a movie the day before the exam. Your emotions may want to enjoy the movie, but your reason tells you, first complete your studies. The movie can wait. That voice of careful judgment is reason. Now Plato says that in the state, this part of the soul is represented by the guardians, also called the philosopher kings. Why philosophers? Because philosophers love wisdom more than wealth or power. They make decisions based on truth rather than personal benefit. The governing virtue is wisdom. Wisdom means the ability to make correct decisions for the welfare of the whole society. According to Plato, rulers should not seek power. They should accept leadership as a responsibility because they possess wisdom. Second part. Spirit. The auxiliaries. Courage. Now let us move to the second row. The second part of the soul is called spirit. Spirit is connected with courage, determination, honor, and self-respect. Think about a soldier protecting the country. Even when danger comes, he does not run away. He remains brave because he feels it is his duty. That inner strength is called spirit. Another example is when you see someone being bullied in school. Although you may feel afraid, you still step forward to protect the weaker student. That courage comes from the spirited part of the soul. In Plato's ideal state, this part is represented by the auxiliaries, or the military class. Their responsibility is to protect the state from enemies and maintain internal order. The governing virtue of this class is courage. However, Plato's idea of courage is not simply physical bravery. True courage means remaining faithful to what reason has declared to be right, even during fear, pain, or temptation. In other words, the soldiers must obey the wise guidance of the philosopher rulers. Their courage must always serve wisdom. Third part, appetite. The workers, temperance. Now let us examine the third row. The third part of the soul is called appetite. Appetite refers to our physical desires. These include the desire for food, comfort, money, wealth, luxury, and pleasure. These desires are completely natural. Every human being has them. There is nothing wrong with appetite itself. The problem arises only when desires become excessive and uncontrolled. For example, earning money honestly is good. But if someone becomes greedy and cheats others for money, then appetite begins to control reason. Similarly, eating is necessary for life. But overeating harms the body. Plato says that desires must always remain under the guidance of reason. In the ideal state, this part of society is represented by the workers. This class includes farmers, merchants, craftsmen, builders, traders, and all people engaged in producing goods and services. The governing virtue is temperance. Temperance means self-control, moderation, and discipline. It means knowing when enough is enough. A temperate person enjoys life's necessities without becoming a slave to desire. The relationship between the three parts. Now look at the entire table. Notice that Plato is comparing three things. First, the three parts of the human soul. Second, the three classes of society. Third, the three virtues. This comparison is not accidental. Plato believes they perfectly correspond to one another. Reason governs the soul just as the guardians govern the state. Spirit supports reason just as the auxiliaries support the guardians. Appetite provides material needs just as the workers produce everything society requires. Every part has its own important function. No part is unnecessary. The problem begins only when one part tries to perform another part's role. What is justice? Now we arrive at Plato's definition of justice. Look at the statement at the bottom of the slide. It says, justice is not one single action. Justice is structural harmony. What does structural harmony mean? It means every part performs its own natural function without interfering with the work of the others. Let us understand this with a simple example. Imagine an orchestra. There are violin players, drummers, flute players, and singers. Each performs a different role. If everyone follows the conductor and plays at the correct time, beautiful music is produced. But imagine the drummer suddenly begins singing, the violinist starts beating the drum, and everyone ignores the conductor. Instead of music, there will only be noise. Similarly, Plato says a society remains just only when every class performs its own proper function. The same applies to the individual. A person is just when reason rules, spirit supports reason, and appetite remains under control. Why is this important? This idea explains why Plato believed that philosophers should become rulers. It was not because philosophers are superior people. It was because the reasoning part of the soul is naturally suited to making wise decisions. Likewise, soldiers should protect, workers should produce, and each group should contribute according to its natural ability. Justice is therefore not equality in the modern political sense. Instead, for Plato, justice means everyone performing the task for which they are naturally best suited, while working together for the good of the whole community. Conclusion. This slide presents Plato's complete definition of justice. He divides both the human soul and the ideal state into three corresponding parts: reason, represented by the guardians, whose virtue is wisdom; spirit, represented by the auxiliaries, whose virtue is courage; and appetite, represented by the workers, whose virtue is temperance. Justice emerges only when these three parts remain in harmony, each performing its own proper function without interfering with the others. Thus, for Plato, justice is not merely obeying laws or punishing wrongdoing. It is the harmonious order of both the individual soul and the entire society, where wisdom guides, courage protects, and self-control keeps desires within proper limits. This principle becomes the central foundation of Plato's political philosophy in the Republic.